Hello Inform Scotland followers and friends. I'll be putting this on my own personal YouTube channel as well. I've just updated the website with the latest that I have excess death data from Scotland. It's all from the National Records for Scotland website, which you can look up yourself. I've got this massive suite of spreadsheets and graphs on my computer, and I really need to go and organise them all because there's some really interesting things coming out in the data now, especially when we compare this year to last year. And just taking a wee look at trends and things and seeing what's happening. There's a number of things which we are concerned about at Inform Scotland. As far as excess deaths are concerned, obviously we've had quite a lot of COVID deaths recently, which is a worry. We've had a lot of deaths due to disruptions to care, because strangely enough, when you interfere with the normal rhythms of life, people will die. We all rely on these structures which are in place to keep us safe normally, which were removed from us in 2020, and that cannot be without cost. And also, we are a bit concerned because we're hearing a lot of reports, and they're certainly backed up by the government's yellow card reports. We're hearing a lot of vaccine-related illnesses as well. And also just the stress that people have been under, the horrendous costs to quality of life, things that some people have experienced. All of these are really, really bad for health. So I probably should be more focused on looking at that than I have been at times. So this last report that we had, I'm up to week 37, and the red line on this first graph that I've added is 2021, and 2020 is the blue line there. We are on our 17th consecutive week of excess death in Scotland just now. It's summertime. Normally, deaths are fairly stable over the summer months, but you'll see we've been having a consistent excess death. This peak that we're at now, and this is an upwards trend we're looking at here, it's quite clearly an upwards trend. That peak is actually higher than the autumn coronavirus wave peak was last year. Now, comparatively, our immunity to COVID was lower there. But now we've got really high excess deaths. I'm not expecting that to improve over the next few weeks, and I think we're going to see pretty horrendous excess deaths actually coming up. Hopefully, I will be wrong. Now my iPad is giving up the ghost. The next two graphs that I have added, just two little ones, was to show 2020 compared to 2021, and looking at all-cause mortality and comparing it to COVID mortality. So last year, COVID mortality and excess mortality actually quite closely matched one another. Throughout the year, you can see excess deaths. If you plot them and COVID deaths, you see that the numbers are really, really similar. Now, last year, I wrote an article which ended up in Think Scotland, and we have it on the website as a blog. It was about how a lot of commentators at the time were talking like COVID was accounting for all of the excess death. Actually, that wasn't really necessarily true, because what we saw was that also excess death was quite closely matched to deaths in the home. And when you analyse the COVID deaths weren't happening at home. So there was a bit of a sort of mystery there. And of course, the thing was that people were dying of COVID, but they were replacing other causes of death to a certain extent. And it wasn't quite as simple as just COVID was contributing to all of those numbers. Anyway, you can see when you look at the graph, and if my iPad would charge a bit faster, then I could show you on here. You could see that they were closely matched. In 2021, however, this has changed. So for the first half of 2021 that's been so far, so let's say up to about week 18, COVID deaths actually exceeded excess deaths. So excess deaths is the number of deaths over what you would normally expect, compared to a weekly average. And for the purposes of this, we've ignored 2020, so we're taking the average from 2015 to 2019. So COVID deaths were actually exceeding excess deaths. So let's say you'd had, I'm just making these numbers up, but that's like saying there's 150 COVID deaths this week. Okay? But then 100 excess deaths. So what that means is that there must have been a deficit of 50 deaths for other causes that have led to that discrepancy. But then what's happened in the second half of 2021 so far is that is reversed. So COVID deaths are now quite a lot lower than excess deaths. And what that means is that other causes of death are really starting to kick in that cannot be attributed to COVID. You can't say anymore, oh, well, we've got excess deaths because we have people dying of COVID. No, we have people dying of lots of other things. That is as a direct result of political decisions that have been made about how life is to be lived in Scotland. And we have to bear that in mind. And we can't forget it. All of these measures that we're taking come at a cost. And as far as I'm concerned, one excess death, whether it's caused by COVID or something else, is not ideal. We're looking to reduce people dying unnecessary and or excess deaths at all, really. Obviously, statistically, you're always going to have some excess deaths. Anyway, these are the two graphs I was talking about, okay? So this is what I'm saying. The green graph, the green line here is COVID deaths and the blue line is excess deaths. So see what I'm saying about them being quite closely matched in 2020. In 2021, COVID deaths exceeded excess deaths for the first half. And now the trend is very much that excess deaths actually exceed COVID deaths by quite a lot. This is a big change. Something significant has changed in the situation in Scotland as far as COVID deaths versus excess deaths are concerned since week 18 of this year. And week 18 would have been early summer. The next graph I've added from 2021, only it's showing excess deaths split by cause. So yellow, the top line, that's COVID deaths. And you can see that they were high in the winter time there, then they fell. And now you can just, sorry about my butterfinger, I'm trying not to touch the screen because it moves it around. Then you can see the yellow line has started to go up again, so that's where we're seeing COVID deaths. The next highest trace is green, that's other causes, and then you've got circulatory and respiratory causes, we've got excess in that, and the red line is respiratory. The blue line is circulatory. So what you see there is for all of those graphs, actually, for all of those traces, the trend is upwards. We've got more normal respiratory deaths now. All through 2020 and through much of 2021, we've had a deficit in respiratory deaths. I find this very interesting. I mean, throughout 2020, respiratory deaths were incredibly low. I mean, I'm not just talking about a little deficit, I'm talking about a massive, massive deficit. What you're seeing here is that other causes of death are going up and circulatory are going up as well. The next graph, I've split up excess deaths by setting. This is a little bit what I was talking about earlier on, where COVID deaths, I can't remember now if that was in this take or the last take I tried. Last year, COVID deaths, we said that the COVID deaths were contributing to excess because they were so well matched. But what we noticed when I went and delved into the data a bit further, I saw that the vast majority of COVID deaths were happening in care homes, and yet the excess deaths, if you looked at just those numbers, they were happening in the home. And so I was questioning whether actually the excess deaths in the second wave of the coronavirus, where it was quite as simple as they were caused by COVID. I don't think they were. Now, looking at 2020 is the dotted lines and 2021 are the solid lines. And what you can see is that there has been an excess, that's the red line, red dotted and red solid. Since the start of 2020, there has been an excess deaths in the home by some considerable margin. This has been very consistent. You can see that this year is very similar to last year, but it's still a significant excess. Now, I find this really quite worrying. If you look at the blue trace, that's care homes. Now, you can see this huge rise in care home deaths during the first wave of the pandemic. That makes perfect sense. But actually, for a lot of 2021, we've had a deficit in excess deaths in the care home, as in no excess deaths. We've had many fewer deaths than normal in care homes. And in fact, that was a consistent pattern right up until week 24 of this year. And even you could argue further to week 29. And now we've got pretty much the expected number of care home deaths. That really says something. So a lot of people died in care homes of COVID in the first wave. Now, people can only die once. So once those people died, those people were vulnerable to coronavirus, very sadly died. But of course, if you've died in a care home, well, you can't die again. And so you would expect to see a deficit after a sort of true epidemic, if the virus will find people that are very susceptible and it will kill them. And then once those susceptible people are taken out, you would expect to see a deficit in the following period. And I think that's what we've seen in care homes. Now, in hospitals, the yellow trace, now it's very difficult to see on here. I really need to stop adding yellow traces. The yellow trace, you can see in 2020, we had very few deaths in hospital. But that's because they moved patients out, and you can see it was a consistent pattern. We had fewer deaths in hospital. Now, you can see that we've still had fewer than expected deaths in hospital for the whole of 2021. That's because of hospital practices. They're trying to keep people out of hospitals, rightly or wrongly. But now the trend is increasing, and we're seeing more people dying in hospital again, and we're back to more normal levels. And then just examining that a little bit more, COVID deaths by setting 2020 to 2021. This is one long continuous graph down here. In the first big wave, the dotted line shows you the total COVID deaths. You can see they were split quite evenly between hospitals and care homes. And then in waves 2 and 3, more people were dying in hospitals, and then fewer were dying in care homes. Now, that's because of what I've said. You've got a fixed population in the care home. The virus found all the vulnerable people here and killed them. Then you've got fewer people left who are still vulnerable. This is a much more sensible, normal phenomenon that you would see during an epidemic. In the first wave, a similar number of people died in hospital of coronavirus, but then in the second wave, there were a lot more people dying in hospital than in care homes. And overall, in waves 2 and 3, you had an awful lot more deaths in hospital than you'd had in wave 1. Now, that's because possibly the virus was reaching the community then, and people were ending up in hospital and dying there. Again, that makes a wee bit more sense. If we'd not locked down, maybe we would have had more people in hospital in the first wave, but then we wouldn't have had so many people in the second and third wave, and we wouldn't have had this prolonged experience of lots of people in hospital very sick and dying. Now, those of you who follow me closely know that we are currently in waves 4 and 5. Now, waves 4 and 5 of coronavirus have not been anything like as deadly, but the big change you see now, if my iPad won't turn off, the big change that you see now is that basically all COVID deaths are happening in hospital. They're not happening anywhere else. And that is very different to what we've seen throughout the rest of the pandemic. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'm starting to bore myself. But as far as that, what I was mentioning about lockdown and infections ending up in hospital and more in the second and third waves, maybe because people were more exposed during the summer or whatever. I was at an incredibly interesting meeting yesterday, and it was with the Panda group. I think it's going to be published on film, and I strongly recommend that you go and watch it. But what this chap was saying, he was an expert in viruses and in the human immune system and the interactions of the two things. And it was the most enlightening talk I've been to in a really, really long time. It was a real honour, actually, to be present at this meeting. And he was talking about how viruses can be dormant in people and get activated by some sort of external factor. And I found this really, really interesting. And he was basically saying that it's it's impossible to be able to tell where the genesis of an infection is, and that we can store them, viruses, for some time before they become activated and make us sick. Now, I am not presenting, nothing that I present here am I presenting as gospel, or it is gospel truth. I'm always truthful, but I'm not stating it as an absolute hard cast iron fact. But it was just really, really interesting to hear him talking about this and how sometimes you can be infected with a virus and not know and not have symptoms. And then weeks or months later, the conditions become perfect for you to become ill with it. And I found it really, really interesting, and it actually did open my mind more to things which I'd previously considered that I didn't think were as worth considering. And it certainly had implications for how locking people down has altered the normal journey of a virus through a population, possibly in a slightly different way to how I'd thought. And it also possibly explains why lockdowns, which seem intuitively to work, have not really worked, because it's the point where infections will reach a peak is more about the external environment and conditions being right for the virus to make people sick, so that they seek out a test so that they come back as a positive. I'm just saying all this just to inform your thinking a bit more. I'm not saying whether he's absolutely right or absolutely wrong. It's just a really interesting perspective, and I think I'm going to be speaking about it a bit more, and I actually am going to be trying to speak to this chap again privately, or at least by email communication. I just find it so interesting. I wanted to share it with you, incredibly smart people. Thank you so much for your attention on this grim and depressing topic. I will see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned, stay sane, stay strong, and remember, I love you.